Welcome to Art in the Spotlight. My name is Annie Roper. I am the curatorial assistant for talk programs and partnerships here at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And today we are so pleased to welcome Matthew Progress, artist, and Alica Hall, from the Nia Centre for the Arts. And we're going to be going deep on 10, the decade in review. And we are going to leave the link to the video here. You can watch it at your leisure. And we are going to potentially try to avoid any further tech issues today. We're not going to do a share screen. So I'm going to leave that here right now. Oop. And just to give you a quick sense of what we're doing, I do want to just first acknowledge that even though we are meeting in the virtual world and all its fraught problem technical stuff, I just want to acknowledge that the Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation and was also the territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. So I'm going to do a quick intro of our panelists today. So Matthew Progress is a Toronto-based multidisciplinary artist specializing in music and film. Heavily influenced by surrealism and Black culture, he creates content rooted in social commentary for the purpose of subverting common nodes of thinking. His work has been featured on numerous media platforms, including Complex, The Fader, Vice, Noisey, and CBC Arts. Alica Hall believes strongly in the transformative potential of the arts to empower and strengthen communities. She has a professional background in strategic communications, but her passion lies in creating safer spaces for artists to create and connect with new audiences. As the executive director of the Nia Centre for the Arts, Alica is now heading up the development of Canada's first disciplinary arts facility dedicated to supporting and showcasing Afro-diasporic art. And they have so much amazing programming as well. So please go check out Nia Centre for the Arts. All right. Should we give everyone a little bit of time to watch the video, or do you want to just like get into it?
I think we should give people a chunk of time to view the film. It's 17 minutes. So
set your timer.
Yeah, should we just set a timer?
17 minutes.
Please look by this TV.
How am I supposed to watch this?
This is Imagination TV. It is Imagination TV. Me, I think it's funny cause I keep on making money. Trading upon a blessing with the teeth is a tsunami. You believe in Juju, I believe in power. Cause if I'm adopting, I'm a Mujidemo was a sour. Now me try me heaven, I don't want to give up. Almost say me do the money, be me better speak out. Me swag, make a mess to me flow. Me leg up in the farm, won't go piss out there cause I'm the best and never seen the style. Especially in the hustle, me kept this in my premium model in my own.
May I have permission of the elders to speak? Traditionally, most of you who know the Black National Anthem, it's called Lift Every Voice and Sing. You know the first verse, and that's what we usually do. But when we have a very special occasion, and when we have a dignitary, then we are to do all three verses. Now conceptually, although the verses are written 1, 2, 3, conceptually, with what this story is about, I'm going to sing it 3, 2, 1.
If you won't help me, I'll go myself.
Hey, wait a second. Harriet, I can't have you risking your life for this network because you're lonely. Rescuing slaves requires skill and careful planning. It requires reading, Harriet. Can you read a sign or a map? Can you read it all?
I put my attention on trying to hear God's voice more clearly.
Do you know what would happen if you got caught? They would torture you until you pointed them right to this office. You got lucky, Harriet. And there's nothing more you can do.
Don't you tell me what I can't do. I made it this far on my own. God was watching, but my feet was my own. Running, bleeding, climbing, nearly drowned, nothing to eat for days and days, man. I made it. So don't you tell me what I can't do.
Fall in your ways, so you can't crumble. Fall in your ways, so you can sleep at night. Fall in your ways, so you can wake up and
It's beautiful. Look at her. It's so lifelike. It's as if she's in this room.
fall in your ways, so you can crumble. Fall in your ways, so you can sleep at night. Fall in your ways, so you can wake up and rise. Walk in your ways, so you won't crumble. Walk in your ways, so you can sleep at night. Walk in your ways, so you will wake up and rise.
I hope that from today on, that we will inform our children and insist on the history books that Emancipation Day is one of the significant moments in our historical experience. I hope that we can do that. And I hope that we will continue to read and we will continue to uplift our children and that we will continue to be inspired to do even greater things. Just clap, just clap. I am so overwhelmed that you have come just to be a witness and to testify and to represent.
All's my life I has to fight, nigga. All's my life hard times like yeah, bad trips like yeah. Nazareth, I'm fucked up, homie, you fucked up, but if God got us, then we gon' be alright.
Nigga, we gon' be alright. Nigga, we gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright. Nigga, we gon' be alright. Huh? We gon' be alright. Nigga, we gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright.
Pride is actually ours. Queer and trans people in color actually started this. We don't need to register for a deadline. We don't need to tell you we're coming. We don't need to pay money for a float. We're just gonna take up space.
Directly here to the police headquarters. We're not going anywhere until the demands that we have been putting forward are responded to. We need to know who killed Andrew Loku, the ways in which we can hold that police officer accountable. Same thing for Jermaine Carby.
You're going to be here tonight. You have to hear and see what Black liberation actually means.
And when I wake up, I recognize you looking at me for the pay cut. Bahamas, I be looking at you from the face down. One Mac 11, even boom with the bass down. Scheming, and let me tell you about my life. Painkillers only put me in the twilight. With pretty pussy and Benjamin is the highlight. Now tell my mama I love her, but this what I like. Lord knows, 20 of them in my Chevy. Tell them all to come and get me, reaping everything I sow. So my karma come in heaven, no preliminary hearings on my record. I'm a motherfucking gangster in silence for the record.
you're in this sunken place.
With wide open arms.
You know Javante by name, Father God. We ask you to be our comforter in this time, Father God. Father God, he was a loving young man. Many years left ahead, but we're not going to question why you called him today.
He was just a pure, good person, innocent, loving. Every time you see him, he'd always hug you.
It's hard to find good dads. It's really hard. And for him to be taken, it's completely unfair.
People don't care who they're shooting, they're just doing it. And it could have been a child.
Too many lives have been gone. My daughter was only 14. She didn't deserve to die like that. And I want him to come forward. Like, you know who you are. You know what you did.
And to see something like this happen in a community, in a black community, is heart-wrenching. Why? Why?
All I want with inverted tongue, from whence does fulfillment come? When I expel from this mortal shell, we're at death the living up. Am I vital if my heart is I do, and I do. Stoic suffering that stirs lukewarm in me.
I want to dance. No, I mean really dance. You know, do Broadway musicals, choreograph the Oscars. I've spent the last few years in my life trying to figure out what makes me happy. And I learned that the only thing that keeps me sane is dancing. So I'm gonna put every inch of my energy into it, so help me Jesus.
I want to take this opportunity while I'm up here to just talk to all the kids that are watching this, that are aspiring to do music, all my peers that make music from their heart, that do things pure and tell the truth. I want to let you know we play in an opinion-based sport. This is a business where sometimes, you know, it's up to a bunch of people that might not understand, you know, what a mixed race kid from Canada has to say. Or look, the point is, you've already won if you have people who are singing your songs word for word, if you're a hero in your hometown. If there's people who have regular jobs who are coming out in the rain, in the snow, spending their hard-earned money to buy tickets to come to your shows, you don't need this right here, I promise you, you already won.
Is there any member of a royal blood who wishes to challenge for the throne?
I was running through the 6 with my woes. Yeah. I was running through the 6 with my woes. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. Running through the 6 with my woes. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. Don't fuck with them niggas, they too irrational. Whoa. This is that nasty flow. Shit, I'm so international. Reps up is in here, got P Rain and Chubby and TJ and Winnie and whoa. Yeah. And you know how that shit go. I might declare it a holiday.
Kawhi up top, looks at the clock, turns the corner for the win. Yeah!
I want to thank Kawhi. I want to thank Kyle. I want to thank Pascal.
I love Toronto. I love this team, and we're going to the NBA Finals. Let's go!
This group of guys, let me do what I do on the floor. Coach Nick, let me do what I do. And now we got a championship. Enjoy this moment, and have fun with it.
And you know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. Running through the 6 with my woes. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. You know how that shit go. Running through the 6 with my woes.
That's the way every day goes. Every time we've no control. If the sky is pink and white, if the ground is black and yellow, it's the same way you showed me. Nod my head, don't close my eyes. Halfway on a slow move.
Hello.
Hello.
So, yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much.
When we first started this project, I was at first open to a different format. Like I thought that it was really important for us as an organization, for those of you who are not familiar, Nia Centre for the Arts is a Black arts organization, and we have a mission to showcase art from the African diaspora. And so we were planning our Black Futures Month programming and realized that we were starting a new decade and wanted to reflect on the past 10 years because we realized so much had happened in that 10 years, from the change in Toronto's landscape, the rise of like our downtown core and the onset of gentrification in very real ways, the rise of the Raptors, new sounds coming from our city and making their way to like the international stage. And we also wanted to reflect like contemporary history. I feel like Black History Month is always like takes this long view, and we inevitably end up talking about slavery, and we lose really important decades in between, and the experience of Black folks post-slavery and post, all these different eras, so Jim Crow and so on. So I know initially when we started this project, I was kind of open to, maybe it would be a short film that would chronicle a specific moment, but ultimately, especially in chatting with you, like really got committed to the video essay and knew that you could kill the video essay and just bring that to life.
Yeah, I think this sort of like video collage or assemblage medium is it's really special when it's the accumulation of a bunch of time. I feel as though it kind of functions the same way that memory functions. It's these little fragmented moments that I actually find I find my own memory lane to be a very surreal place. The way that memories kind of shift and flow into each other, and you think back to something that happened maybe 5 years ago, and the order of things is not always exact, and like what specific year this thing you're always like, wait, did this thing happen before this thing? When did I? And so there's like a sort of natural surreal element to memory, and I think video collage, when done like this, it really mirrors that. And thinking about Black folks in Toronto in the past decade, we've been through so much. There's been such a sort of meta cocktail of events and feelings, and so this format really felt perfect to look at 10 whole years
together.
Yeah.
And it's unique because we don't see that in the city as well, right? Like if there are significant appointments of Black leaders into key institutions or organizations, they might be marked, but I think there's also sometimes an avoidance to recognize those accomplishments, because it's like, this is a first in 2020 or 2017 or whatever it is. And we also don't collect data as well as our neighbors in the South. So we don't have this real sense of like marking progress over a period of time, and we don't have like an annual time that we do that. So I would
add to that too, in this era, given how much information we're inundated with, if you're not documenting and archiving, then it's complete erasure. And whether we're talking about Black stories and Black legacies or just human stories in general, I think the attention span of people is drastically shrinking, and the shelf life of a story is it's a couple days to a couple weeks, and so I think that it makes archiving particularly important as we face this new technological world.
The attention span and news cycle is such a real battle, and oftentimes for us, we're not included in those stories to begin with, right?
Exactly.
So the ability for our community to be able to mark those moments and actually celebrate them and hold on to them and look back, because sometimes you're like, we're like, oh, okay, that person got appointed, but what actually happened? And then, next thing you know, they're on to a new role, and we haven't even really acknowledged as a community the seminal impact that they had in a particular area. And that's why I love that sort of like montage in the beginning of just folks who have been appointed to roles, whether it's like Olivia Muama at Pride or Cameron Bailey at TIFF, and seeing all of that, like just Black excellence together, just invokes a sense of pride. And it might have been something that you just messaged someone on WhatsApp, did you see this? And then you go on with your day, but seeing them aggregated is this beautiful sense of memory making.
I think, and there's also something very special too about us doing the storytelling. The source of the story matters in how it's documented. And when we're thinking about a more sort of prestigious role, for lack of a better term, like, for example, the director of TIFF or something that would make the evening news, when it's coming from a more sort of like general news platform, it's different than when it's coming from a member of our community or a platform that we've created. So I think it's important for us to tell our own stories and retell our own stories that get told in a more public forum, because the context it matters a lot.
Absolutely. Because all of the challenges and struggles are not always embedded in that story. It's just like, oh, this person was appointed.
Yeah,
Not
exactly.
recognizing like how sometimes like, yeah, community factors into those decisions, or, you know, it's a result of community advocating for new roles to be created.
Yeah.
So I yeah, definitely feel like that's really important. And then I feel like technology is something that always stands out to me, like the way that you incorporated the impact of technology. Because I remember we talked about that as like a really important theme that had changed our lives, and of course people all over the world in the past decade. The rise of social media, you know, our phones being little computers, and I think that's also what made this piece be really well. I know we screened it originally in February, but when we screened it again in May, it was, you know, the week that we came, you know, face to face with a lot of traumatic events both in our city and south of the city, the death of George Floyd, the death of Regis. And so like technology felt like in that moment was the only way to bring community together.
Yep.
And, you know, folks watching it then really, there was a lot of emails I got and comments just that like, it was so needed to see this kind of piece at that moment, particularly when it kind of felt like it summed up Black life, which is so often marked by trauma and violence.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And it was so strange because this is why I don't know about you, but I've noticed in the past few months, the synchronicity of the universe is like real insane, probably more than it's ever been for me in my life. And, you know, when we planned that online screening, we picked a date long before what happened with George Floyd and with the uprisings. And they really kind of popped off like the day before the screening, I think it was, wasn't it?
It was like Monday, Tuesday, and we did the screening on Thursday or Friday.
On Thursday. So it was like it was still just sinking in for people. And you know, we had planned to do the screening and leave the film up for maybe 4 or 5 hours for people to view. And the response was a way where we had to leave it up for the whole weekend. And just for me as a creative, like that, I really live for the feeling of like of creating a thing, putting it out into the world, and then seeing people take ownership of it in a way where it feels more like it's the community's now than it is your own. And I feel like that happened, and that didn't really happen the first time we screened it live on a big screen. And so talk about a symbol of a technological era, you know, where like things kind of they don't really touch the collective mind unless they can happen digitally in some capacity. Yeah. So, you know, and then so and you're also talking about the intro, and I really do think in the past decade, the most important thing that's happened to humans is our lives being moved online. And as we inch closer and closer to the moment of our curated online profile or avatar being more important than our actual person. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that moment. And as the pandemic has now made real life interaction dangerous, right? I mean, and, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist, so there's all kinds of different, and like, you know, there's all kinds of, it's all speculation, right? But it definitely lends to this idea that sooner or later our online lives will be more important than our actual lives.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what people were also feeling and watching this is, I mean, it is literally ironic because like we did have the in-person event, as you mentioned, and then this screening, I think because people were watching so much Black Death and subsequent protest, really felt like so many of the themes resonated. And that's how I felt when I watched it for the first time too, right? It's just like, I felt very seen as a Black person who grew up in Toronto, as a Black woman, because so many of the moments and events and locations were like very specific, obviously, to our unique narratives as a city. And I think it's really been in recent history that our city has felt like that, has felt like it's stepped into its own as a global city with a brand, and you know, a brand that extends beyond the country, right? Like when I go now to New York and say I'm from Toronto, people are like, oh yeah, the Raptor, oh Drake, do you know Drake? Like there's this sense of knowing more about the city than just like, oh, it's in Canada, right? You know?
And like when we were kids, when you go to Chicago and say you're from Toronto, they ask you about hockey,
yeah,
you know, or like some, right, exactly. So, and we actually spoke about this a few days ago, but this idea of the Toronto that existed kind of when we were teenagers, and that we really did not have a unified Toronto identity. Our identity as adolescents and young people was more based around neighborhoods and regions of the city. And we kind of lived in this Toronto universe. And now Toronto has this global identity that has a lot to do with, you know, specific artists, and now with the Raptors. And so, and people kind of our age, and I won't disclose our age, but are in this like kind of middle era where we were raised in one version of Toronto and are now, you know, full adults in this other version. And, you know, I think that there's a stark difference between the two. So with 10, it is the representation of this. It's through the lens of a person, myself, that experienced both of those eras, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is unique, you know. I think that a lot of people, you know, upon reflection would be like, yeah, Toronto versus everyone is a very new phenomenon.
Very new.
Or
Very new.
like, yeah, Toronto might be like, you know, a magnet that you pick up, you know, on your way out of the city. But now you can see, even outside of the city, that there's this culture that is really about defending and riding for your city. And so much of that wouldn't be possible without that sort of segment that you have at the end of individuals, celebrities, you know, singers, choreographers. Often this has largely happened, quite frankly, on the backs of Black labor. And we have a lot of musicians and artists and creatives to thank for putting us on the map around the world.
Yep. And, you know, as per usual, I think, as you're saying, our Black cultural labor over the years, not just our cultural labor, our intellectual labor, our physical labor, over the years have essentially built a rich kind of Toronto art identity and cultural identity that now the white corporate world has co-opted and is making the most money off of yet again. So, you know, yeah.
The newest addition to that.
I mean, the co-opting of radical Black activism by the corporate white establishment is truly amazing to watch, and it is very much happening. I mean, you're turning on CNN to read headlines about white supremacy. This is an interesting time.
Yeah, and before, like, you know, Black Lives Matter was, you know, such a radical statement. Like, just to actually think about how uneasy folks were, you know, 3-4 years ago with saying that, and now seeing it emblazoned on the side of the Raptors bus, it is like pretty crazy to see the shift. And on the one hand, you want to feel like, you know, more people have recognized the historical inequities and systemic oppression of Black people. And on the other hand, you're like, but is this now also just like the easiest way for you to act like you're investing in Black communities and that you stand with them, although nothing has changed? It's a
100%.
hard place. It's like an exciting place, but then a difficult place.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that I agree with what you're saying, in that for corporate enterprise, it's all about the path of least resistance. Like, it's not about politics. Mm-hmm. So if the path of least resistance is to get behind the Black Lives Matter movement, then so be it.
Yeah.
You know, that's how they see it. And I think a lot of people have it confused, you know?
Yeah, and it was definitely very different. You know, I love that you have such strong imagery of Black Lives Matter and their protests in, in the segment, because arguably that's the most significant movement that has come out of the past decade, and is probably the largest movement in the world right now. And so being able to see those sort of early activations and, the interruption and disruption of Pride, which of course is a moment that's dear to my heart, is really important to include in this like narrative of this decade, right? Because I think Toronto has a long history of fighting for Black rights, in response to things that they're seeing south of the border, as well as in response to injustice here, and it hasn't really been as visible, or I think enshrined in people's minds in the way that BLM has been able to sort of infiltrate and have a sort of consistent presence in our collective consciousness.
Yeah, and that speaks to the earlier points about documentation, and sort of memory, collective memory. And we do have like a very rich and deep history of Black activism in Toronto, with organizations like the Black Action Defense Committee. We have a significant quote unquote Young Street riot that happened when the police murdered Raymond Lawrence back in the early 90s. And so we have a lot of elders and sort of pioneers of critical Black activism in this city. And it's even in 10 at the end of the death segment, you'll see Dudley Laws, who was one of the co-founders of Bad Sea, as well as Charles Roach. And there's many others who I put them in because they actually passed away during the decade, but there's many others on that list. Sharona Hall is another one, and lots that are still living. Akua Benjamin, the list is very deep. And so I think it's important for us to not recreate the wheel too much and know, about what happened here before. And the other quick thing I wanted to say too is, in the activism segment of 10, I really wanted to highlight the Black Lives Matter TO movement that happened a few years back, after the death of Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin. And we really saw a Toronto chapter of BLM that was very much queer-led, and highlighted the important intersectionality of Black activism, and that if we are not led by the most marginalized members of our community, then like we're not truly engaging in social justice. And we saw the queering of Black activism in a way that was extremely special, and means a whole lot. And so it was important for me to highlight that.
Yeah, it's so important because it's something that I actually feel like has trickled into the US. Like I feel like because of the conversations around, or the conversations that BLM started around Pride, that Prides in North America had to respond to that and look at the intersections of racial identity and sexual orientation and the ways in which Black lives are marginalized within the queer movement. And so that then precipitated conversations in queer communities, would strengthen conversations about racial injustice, and sort of, the inclusion of queer lives in the broader BLM movement. And so I think that like sort of exchange between queer communities and looking at intersections with racial communities has been now bolstered, like made stronger over the past decade, and is really important to the movement and us being able to actually get ahead.
And you can really see how it's affected like the Gen Z folks. And they have more of an inherent understanding of that than our generation did. And I love to see it.
Yeah, I was at a protest that my nephew organized a few weeks ago, and it was just so beautiful to see he's like 15 years old and lives in Brampton, and just seeing all these signs of like Black Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter and Black Queer Lives Matter, and just like, yeah, that's not something that you would see at your typical march 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
No, and that is truly heartwarming, and it's one of the few things that make me feel like things have evolved in certain ways. And we've experienced some progress.
Yeah, and it's such an important part too, as you mentioned, of like the community archiving, because I feel, we still have a long way to go in terms of the recognition of community leaders and what we recognize. Like protesters are rarely seen as civic leaders, as people who are championing justice, as people who are like shifting society, right? Like people don't go from being a protester to being in like some kind of hall of fame or being recognized at Queen's Park. So it's often that kind of leadership from the Black community that just is within our community, even though we, advance rights that impact all Canadians and help everyone live a more, thrive in our society and live a more just life. It's like, you're not going to end up, as a port, like, enshrined in the halls of, yeah.
Right. No, yeah, I totally agree. And it's like, it's funny that people who are involved in significant protests they're never respected until maybe it's in hindsight. Their work is never thought of as instrumental or important until it's in hindsight. And we're seeing that now. It's the protests are met with the first thing that they're met with is a critique, is everybody, all the outsiders' views on how the protest should be happening and how it shouldn't be happening. And also everybody, searching for a charismatic leader, as though a movement can't just be human beings moving. We need, we're constantly looking for a president. We want a president of everything.
Yeah. And someone who has all the answers, right? It's like you can't just lead the protest. You have to have a solution and, be able to map out a 25-year plan for how this institution or city is going to change.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Not be willing to like meet people and say and listen.
Yeah, and that like any true transformation that we're going to experience has to be so multifaceted that there cannot be one head of anything. Like it literally has to be a mass movement, an organized one, but still involving many different like cells and spaces and sectors. And I think there's a lot of people simplifying what's happening right now. It's,
Absolutely. And I know, just aware of time too, we have another 5 minutes. Okay, no questions so far, no worries. But folks, if you do have any questions about the film or for us about the process, you can feel free to drop them in the Q&A. One of the things that also stands out to me in this piece is like the ability for us to also take this moment to celebrate each other. And this reflection being like, just a 10-year chunk. And I'm kind of interested in like, doing it almost as an annual thing, just because I feel like so much happens in a year, if 2020 is any indication of that. But I think it would be a really cool exercise to do it maybe like every 5 years, to sort of precipitate this conversation about where are we as a community, where is people's understanding of the, the Black experience, what progress has been made, as like a way to mark that. Because as you said, like we live in this information age when so much comes at us and the opportunities for deep reflection seem far and fewer between. We constantly just live like wanting the next answer or the solution. We don't want to walk in the protest. We want to just be like, okay, so what do they want, right? It's like we don't allow ourselves to do this sort of deeper reflection and thinking and then bring forward our thoughts. So
yeah, I think you're onto something there too, in that because we're being inundated with so much information, revisiting stuff has all new value, and there's probably more and more to gather each time you watch something. And this idea of a piece of content being kind of like a barometer for how things are, and you revisit it every so amount of time. I think that makes a lot of sense. And with this piece, I think it's of that decade, but it's very much touches on the sort of classic cornerstones of our community that exist in every era and decade. And so it's a good way for us to check on those things as well.
Have regular conversations, like how are we doing,
Exactly.
Especially if we don't want to, like, we know that society isn't collecting enough data to measure how have things changed in, the arts sector or, the impact of Canadians. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a question come up, so I'm kind of looking at it.
Yes.
So the question is about the process to create a film like this, and Lexi's wanting to know, how did you even begin the approach of this project, and how long did it take?
Well,
I gave you a very short timeline.
What's that?
I said I gave you a short timeline.
You very much did. Yeah, it was probably, what, 3 weeks? I think 3 weeks altogether. I would have wanted probably 3 months, but that's how time goes. And we were getting close to the new year, or we had passed the new year.
Yeah, we're in January.
Yeah. And so it was really happened in phases. The first phase being, meeting with Nia, and it was technically, it was a commission. So meeting with Nia and finding out the need, and us having like a deep conversation around the decade, and, delving into this city and Black culture in the city and what the decade looked like. And also polling some key community members with just a light survey about what people perceived as the most important kind of pieces of the decade. And through that, we built a master list of things that needed to be covered, people that needed to be highlighted. And I took that list into my lab and shut the door for a long time, and and lived online and watched hundreds of hours of footage, and built a rough cut that was all encompassing. And then I worked with an associate of mine, Cam Lasovich. I don't know if he's on the chat right now, but Cam is also an incredible editor, and he helped me put some of the finishing touches on it, and with color correction and making sure the sound was what it needed to be, and that's how it was done. And it really was a blur, but yeah, we were happy with what came out.
We were very happy with what came out. Beautiful, beautiful documentation of our city, and particularly Black leadership and Black culture and Black life, and challenges and trauma we faced, but also the beautiful moments of the past decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely would be something that I would revisit as a project to continue this conversation, and sort of mark years and the passage of time and events.
Yeah. Or if all parties are willing and able, maybe it's each decade repeat piece of content that we need to redo each time. I mean, Lord knows where we'll all be in 10 years.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, and given that what's happened in the past 8 months of 2020.
Yeah, I think it would already look completely different as a piece. There's a lot.
Very rich, a lot of content for this year.
Yep. We might need 10, the 2020 edition. That's just about 2020.
Yeah. Hopefully, I mean, we have 4 more months, and hopefully amazing things come from it.
Yeah, hopefully it could have a happy ending.
Yeah, and definitely I would agree. Maybe it needs its own year.
So
yeah, it's 5 o'clock now.
I
don't think we have any more questions. So yeah, I think I would tell everyone to share again. I think this piece is a great conversation starter. That's what I've heard from people too.
Yeah.
Is that it's a great way to start conversation about, the realities of the Black experience in Canada and in the world. Quite frankly, as you mentioned, these themes are not things that are specific to Toronto, but unique in how we presented them here. And so
very much so. Yeah. And now that it's available permanently for free viewing, it's a great thing to throw on after a dinner party, or when you have, your socially distanced company over. It is a good conversation piece. And yeah, it gets the juices flowing, and yeah, there's been a lot of great conversations that have happened. And I just wanted to quickly thank everybody that came through today. And I wanted to thank you personally, Alica, for all your amazing work, and everything that you're doing at Nia, which is such a gravely important organization that everybody needs to check out and support. And thanks to the AGO for doing this as well.
Thank you to everyone for tuning in. And of course, Matthew, I love this project so much, and I'm so glad that we're able to bring it to another audience to share, and look forward to working with you again and bringing it to other screens elsewhere in the future. So yeah,
Absolutely.
as everyone mentioned, niacentre.org. Check us out, and you can always watch 10 there. Thanks so much. Bye.
Have a good night.